Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Christina Gomez, and I am the Events and Programming Librarian at Milwaukee Public Library. On behalf of City Librarian Joan Johnson, I want to welcome you to this celebration of the new book, An Independent Spirit, The Quiet, Generous Life of Helen Bader, presented in partnership with Vader Philanthropies. You can find a copy of this biography in one of three ways. You can check it out from your local Milwaukee Public Library. You can purchase a copy via Amazon, and you can request a free copy courtesy of Vader Philanthropies. We're going to place links to each of those three options in the chat box. I want to cover just a couple of logistics for today's Zoom program. As participants, your microphones are muted, your webcams are off. But we do have some time for Q&A, and you can go ahead and enter those into the Q&A box. That should be part of your Zoom dashboard. And you can do that at any time, and we will make sure we get to those at the end of the talk. And if you do have any technical issues, you can use the chat box. My colleague Beth, who is behind the scenes, or I will assist you with that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Bader, President and CEO of Vader Philanthropies. So Dan was the founding CEO of the Helen Bader Foundation in 1992. He serves on several local, national, and global boards and committees, including Greater Milwaukee Committee for Community Development, Relief International, and Rogers Behavioral Health System. He has been recognized for his efforts to improve the quality of life in the city of Milwaukee and for his daily commitment to active engagement and an enduring investment in educational and social justice programs that cultivate the minds and hearts of all people. Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Christina. It's so great to be with you today. I was just thinking as you were talking about my memories going back when I was a little kid, and my mom at the time taking me, I probably was just a little kid, like maybe 3 or 4 years old, for story hour. And I think that was my first introduction to the big library. So a lot of fond memories there. Well, welcome everybody. I am Dan Bader, and I'm President and CEO of Vader Philanthropies. We are a global foundation. We started as the Helen Bader Foundation in 1992 to honor our mother, Helen Daniels Bader. Today, Vader Philanthropies supports organizations that carry out my mother's spirit of seeing people, seeing the beauty in people, and encouraging them to be their best selves. Today, we're going to hear stories about Helen Daniels Bader from 2 people who knew her well as a mother and as an aunt. The conversation will be facilitated by Priscilla Pardini, who weaved countless conversations, stories, and hundreds of photos to bring to life an independent spirit, the quiet, generous life of Helen Daniels Bader. First, a few brief introductions. Helen Daniels Bader, oldest son, David, my brother, is Vice President of Vader Philanthropies and a director on the board. David is a proud father of 4 of Helen's grandchildren. David is also a registered architect working in Eastern Pennsylvania, and he is president of Fat Badger Bakery, an online vegan cookie company located in Pipersville, Pennsylvania. David holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's degree in architecture from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He has studied sculpture and drawing at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art in Philadelphia. David follows his father's passion for old master paintings and enjoys attending fine art auctions and studying Northern Baroque art history. My cousin, Deirdre Britt, is Helen's only niece. Deirdre serves as chair for the Helen Daniels Bader Advisory Committee, as well as board secretary. The niece of Helen Bader, Deirdre is actively involved in the visual arts and has served with a number of community arts nonprofits. She holds a bachelor's degree from Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and a master's degree in fine arts from the University of Hawaii. Her business background includes positions as business, marketing manager, and creative manager for Hallmark cards. Deirdre resides in Chicago. Priscilla Pardini is the author of An Independent Spirit, The Quiet, Generous Life of Helen Daniels Bader. Priscilla Pardini is a freelance writer and editor based here in Milwaukee and a former education reporter for the Milwaukee Journal. She is author of Women Making a Difference, American Association of University Women in Milwaukee, and the Faye Macbeth Foundation, a story of giving which won the Wilmer Shears Bridge Award for Excellence in Communication. Her other work includes On Her Own, The Life of Betty Bryn, a biography for children about the philanthropist for whom the city's Children's Museum and Children's Room at the Milwaukee Public Library are named. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation and walk away inspired by an extraordinary, multifaceted woman, a citizen of many worlds and cultures, yet comfortable in all of them, who always had a smile on her face and a sense of dignity and compassion for human beings. It is my pleasure to turn the program over to Priscilla, David, and Deirdre.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Christina. I'll just say that all of us are huge library fans, so it's particularly satisfying to be here at this program sponsored by the Milwaukee Public Library. So my goal in writing Helen's biography was to tell her story within the context of the era, the places, the events, and the interactions that impacted her life. And I also wanted to develop her story in a way that gave readers a picture of a real person. And in this, I was strongly encouraged by Dan and David to tell the honest story of their mother's life. My research began with a copy of the Daniels DeVay family tree that was provided by your brother, Alan DeVay, Deirdre, along with some backup documentation. And it was augmented by hundreds of Aberdeen newspaper stories going back to the late 1800s, the family archives, and a series of very helpful video interviews that included interviews of your parents, Deirdre, and your father, David, that was produced by what was then the Helen Bader Foundation. Shortly after Helen's death. And of course, I'm indebted to the many librarians in Shorewood, in Milwaukee, in Illinois, and South Dakota for their research assistance as well. I learned that Helen's ancestors emigrated from England and Germany and traveled west from New York, Connecticut, and Virginia. They established a trading post, they were fur traders, they interacted with the local Chippewa Indians. They fought in the Civil War and they farmed the land. They were among the pioneers that settled the Dakota Territory, a place known for its harsh living conditions, including unending cycles of drought, floods, blizzards, and insect infestations. These people were strong, they were tough. And Deirdre, I remember one of the earliest things you told me about your mother and your Aunt Helen was how proud they were of this pioneer, of their pioneer ancestry. Could you, and how they endured, what they endured and how that impacted their life?
Right. Well, thanks, Priscilla. Yes, my mother all her life talked about how much she loved the prairie, loved growing up on the prairie. And I think for those two girls to grow up in a small town, very small town, in the middle of the Dakota Territory, South Dakota, looking out over those prairies must have been extraordinary. It was certainly challenging, as you say, harsh, very difficult. This was, they were both born in the 20s, grew up in the 30s, the depths of the Depression, children of a small business owner. Can you imagine? But my mother retained that fierce love of the prairie, and I know that it was instilled in both those girls. And if you've ever been out there, it is definitely part of the big sky country. Sunsets are all around you, and it's magnificent. So, but it was not easy. When I was in grade school, there was a story in a book we had that when in times of drought, which they certainly had out there, that the farmers' wives would use the water from cooking the dinner. Then the family would have to bathe in the same water. The water would go through all these cycles. They might wash their clothes in it, and then they might go out and take whatever was left and pour it on the little tiny fruit tree in the yard that was struggling. you would never waste a drop. And I came home and asked my mother if that was true, and she started telling me all those stories.
Remarkable. Remarkable. David, so your great grandfather, John Allen, established a trading post, later ran his own dry goods store. He survived skirmishes with the Chippewa and a shipwreck off the Florida coast, only to be murdered years later in his own barn. What a colorful life. That was in Red Wing, Minnesota at that point. What a colorful life. And you had a very interesting reaction when you first saw a photo of John Allen's wife, Teresa Gaylord. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, I'm staring at the photo right now, and I think I also see my grandfather, which you can't see here, but I mean, her husband, that is. And she has her hands on her head, and I think she's saying, oh my God, what have I gotten into? But at any rate, she's laughing, and there's sort of a resemblance that was between my mother and I, this sort of big grin with the big cheeks, and I see it in Teresa's cheeks as well. And then on the right, you can see our daughter Helen, named after her grandmother Helen, and she also has that same look. So I can almost hear my great-great-grandmother Teresa chuckling. And I would never have known that had you not forced me to look at this photograph. Thank you.
You're welcome. There's just a lot of remarkable, interesting stories about your ancestors. But if you fast forward to Aberdeen, just after the turn of the century, that's where Helen's grandparents settled, representing two different mainstays of the community at the time. George and Leonia were traditionalists, highly respected, socially prominent. George sold insurance and he was a civic leader. And then you have Joe and Pearl Daniels, who kind of embodied what I think of as Aberdeen's forward-looking can-do spirit. He was a railroad man for a long time, but then he also went on to speculate in real estate, and he actually sold cars. Your grandmother, Jessie Mabbitt, was smart as a whip, quite feisty as a young girl, and the first in her family to attend college at Milwaukee Downer, where she enrolled in 1915. Your grandfather, Lloyd Daniels, was a beloved pharmacist who ran Daniels Drugs in Aberdeen for 40 years. They marry in 1919, and 2 years later, Deirdre, your mother, Marjorie's born. And 6 years later, on May 20th, 1927, the day that Charles Lindbergh takes off for Paris in the first transatlantic flight, Helen is born. And even early on, she begins displaying her independent spirit, a theme that would come to define her life. As you can see, she was a tomboy who loved nothing more than riding her bike and not wearing the dresses that her mother and grandmother made for her. Of course, Helen and Marjorie's childhood, as you said, Deirdre, is largely defined by the Depression. And you're also known as on the Great Plains as the Dirty 30s. For the natural disasters, again, all those dust storms, the drought, the grasshoppers that continued to plague the region. So times were definitely hard. And I'm just going to read a short excerpt, kind of affiliated with Daniels Drugs and what was going on at the time. So during this period, it is said that farm women mostly swept up dust, but Marjorie recalled that many Aberdonian women did too. The first thing every morning, the grasshoppers were in the front door of the store, she said, where everything was covered in dust. In fact, all of Aberdeen's Main Street merchants were struggling, yet Lloyd refused to give up or give in to the harsh economic realities, routinely working 19-hour days to keep the store afloat and build his business. It wasn't unusual for him to go back to the store late at night if someone needed a prescription filled. If anyone had a sick baby out in the country, he'd take it to them, recalled Marjorie. Lloyd also refused to turn away customers who couldn't afford their prescriptions, including the destitute farmers. and local Sioux who lived outside of town and were especially devastated by the economic downturn. The American Indians typically came to the back door of the pharmacy where Lloyd provided whatever they needed. Now, there were also happy times, though, at the pharmacy, as your mother recalled, Deirdre. And I love this anecdote from the first day, the opening day of Daniel's Drugs. So 9-year-old Marjorie walked her 3-year-old sister the 7 blocks from their home to the store. So Helen had on a cute little dress and her cute curls, recalled Marjorie. And we walked down and walked inside, and I said, "Now don't tell Daddy that Mother's baking a cake." Helen promptly looked up at her father, said, "Daddy, get down," and whispered in his ear, "Mother's making a big cake." Continued Marjorie. I was mortified. I just felt so bad. David, you and your brother, along with your mother, made annual trips to Aberdeen as a child, as did you, Deirdre, and your siblings. But I'm wondering, David, if you could share some of your memories of Lloyd and Jessie and the traits that you think that they passed on to your mother.
Oh, okay, I think we could go up maybe twice a year, and it was on the train. And it was a big deal, and that's the way you traveled in those days. And we'd leave like 10 in the morning and get there like 1 in the morning. 10 in the morning and 1 in the morning next day, actually. So, and I can say that my brother and I both have, had great memories of those long train rides. And my grandfather always picked us up. He was Mr. Calm and drove us very slowly home. And my grandmother, who was very, very intelligent, was there waiting for us and really loved seeing us. And my mother insisted on us getting to know her parents and sharing us with her parents. And my mother's life from the prairie kind of gave her the basis for who she eventually became, obviously. My grandfather had a big, beautiful shop that came from his father, and it was in his basement. He didn't use it much, but because he's a pharmacist, but he taught us how to build things, and we would go in the basement and really make a mess. And I have to say that today, given what I do and like to build things, that's really the reason that happened. My grandmother was very studious and respected good education, and that, of course, is an important part of our family. We really think education is incredibly important for anybody, and we were always very studious, always reading. So those are a couple of the traits that my grandparents handed off to us. Plus, we felt like we were such Americans being out on the Great Plains.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Deirdre, what about you? What are some of the things that you remember that your mother told you about life behind that soda fountain at Daniel's Drugs?
Yeah, my mother loved it. They both had, Helen, when my mother went off to college, then it was Helen's turn to be behind the soda fountain and really be the #1 helper. But they both grew up helping their dad down there after school. They'd be working, taking care of the business so he could be still filling prescriptions in the back. They'd be up front, helping out. But there's a funny story that I think it is in the book. I think there's even photographs in the book that our grandmother, right, David, you'll remember this. She loved things to look nice. And so she always thought she might know best about what should be in the front windows of the drugstore for display and so forth. And so she had very strong opinions about that. So our grandfather once challenged her to a little bit of a contest. They each took one of the big front windows, and she got to put perfumes and ladies' handkerchiefs and little coin purses and all kinds of frilly, pretty things in one window. And he put, foot powder and digestive aids and all that kind of stuff who knows, big bottles and stuff in the other window. And he said, the contest is, we'll see which window brings in more money for the next 30 days. Well, his window won, but she tried. She always tried. And that kind of sums them up. He always had a twinkle, and he was the kindest man in town. Everyone loved him. So
Yep.
a wonderful influence on both the daughters.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think you're right. But both Helen and your mother followed in Jesse's footsteps by enrolling at Milwaukee Downer College, which turns out to have huge, of course, positive ramifications for Milwaukee and for UWM. After she graduates, Helen stays in Milwaukee, where she meets and in 1952 marries your father, David, Alfred Bader, an Austrian Jew who had witnessed Nazi atrocities in Vienna and managed, amid profound challenges, to earn a PhD in chemistry from Harvard. And despite his quirky, often difficult and off-putting personality, he goes on to found, with Helen's help, Aldrich Chemical Company, which becomes one of the world's most successful chemical companies at the time. He also becomes a leader in Milwaukee's Jewish community, and he amasses a world famous collection of old master paintings. Clearly he was a brilliant and very accomplished man. I found it really interesting that Helen, despite having majored in botany and being quite shy, goes on to work at Aldrich and quickly becomes indispensable to the operation, both because of her calm efficiency and also her profound interest in and her ability to relate to Aldrich's employees, which was a trait that Alfred did not share. So David, could you talk a little bit about that, about your parents' respective roles in growing the company, and how Helen did relate so well to such a wide range of employees?
Okay, so my father was very good at finding the right people to do the right things for the business. And so we had an incredible variety of people that came to us and to work at our business, or came to us to sell things to our business or to buy things from our business. And my dad he was a great salesman, so he really knew how to turn it on when he needed to, and make people feel like they really needed to do business with him. So along with that comes my mother, who makes everybody feel comfortable and accepted. And I think that's probably the most important part of, maybe we call the family, the business, the family that is the business, people that work at the business. And the people, I think they both agreed that people were basically graded on how they did, or how hard they worked, or their competence, him more into competence than her. But it really didn't matter who you were, or what the color of your skin was, or what your background was, or what your mental faculties were. If you could do your job, you were part of the community. And this apparently was unusual, but I do remember working there in the early 70s, and a woman of color got promoted to be a group leader in pre-pack. Okay, so that's a whole bunch of stuff in there. But she was so happy to become a manager, and I took it just for granted that she got to become a manager because she deserved to become a manager. And apparently, when you were Black, you didn't just get to be a manager by being the best that you could be. And so it wasn't until I got like a little further in life that I realized that a lot of people's pathways were clipped off in our business through my parents' vision, and the rules they set for the business allowed people to grow based on who they were. So
And I'll just mention that Helen's reach extended even beyond the employees of Aldrich. And many of you may know, who for 20 years was a vice chancellor at UWM and just retired this spring. But I'll read another excerpt from the book. So when Joan Prince was 15 years old, she was walking around downtown Milwaukee one day in 1970 with her sister, and they came upon the Aldrich Chemical Building. I loved math and science, but I thought the only thing you could do with math and science was become a doctor or a nurse, she said. I remember telling my sister, oh, maybe I could be a chemist. Prince decided to come back another day when I looked better, she said. And although one of her teachers at Wisconsin Lutheran High School urged her to call and make an appointment to talk to someone at Aldrich, she was just too nervous, and she actually hung up once the call went through. Instead, she returned to the plant, intending to drop off a letter in which she requested such a meeting. Trying to work up the nerve to go inside, Prince noticed a woman standing in front of the building whom she would come to call Miss Helen. I told her I was a high school student who wanted to talk to someone about what chemists did and how to become one. Helen took Prince inside and set up an appointment for her to come back and observe one of Aldrich's chemists at work. Recalled Prince, I was terribly nervous and she made me feel very, very welcome. She was so nice and genuine and had such a warm smile. When you're 15, that means a lot. Decades later, well, Prince did go on to become a scientist for 20 years, and then went to work at UWM. And she recalled years later that Helen's impact on her life translated into something that she decided she wanted to emulate, noting, you never realize the effect you can have on someone's future, which I thought was very, very touching. Deirdre, you've made the point several times that you felt that Helen's marrying Alfred was an important mark of independence that she exhibited.
Right. Well, it was certainly not the choice that her family back in South Dakota, or maybe her friends, would have expected. And it did show that independence and that she knew her own mind. This man was charismatic, brilliant. He was obviously going places. She probably was drawn to his energy. And they ended up being a good match, both as we've talked about at Aldrich, but when it came to raising a family. And but yeah, it was there was a little bit of consternation back in Aberdeen. Jesse was a little taken aback. Lloyd Daniels, Helen's father, would have supported her no matter what she wanted to do, being the loving father he was. Jesse was not so sure until she met Alfred. And Jesse, valuing a good mind and a brilliant thinker and an educated person, as David pointed out earlier, Jesse realized, okay, this is a man of substance. I guess it's going to be okay. And certainly my daughter is set on this. So it was a pretty interesting choice. And you have to admire that, because she was going to marry who she wanted to marry.
That's right. That's right. And then 6 years into their marriage, with Aldrich up and running, this would have been in 1958. You were born, David, and 3 years later, Dan, your brother Dan, was born. And again, defying tradition, Helen continues to work at Aldrich part-time, while assuming most of the work of raising you guys, in large part because your father, David, was so focused on the business and was often abroad for weeks and weeks at a time, drumming a business. By all accounts, Helen was a wonderful mother. And I was particularly struck, David, by your parents' differing parenting styles and how you and Daniel both talked about how life at home changed during those times when your father left town and Helen became the fun mom. And also, David, I understand that you have some memories of the Milwaukee Public Library when you were growing up.
Okay, so let's cover the library first. My dad would go out of town. We would go out to dinner every night. Things were much more relaxed. And after going out to dinner, we'd often go to the library to do our homework. My mom would look for novels to read, and she'd look for mystery books for my dad to read, and my brother and I would pretend to do our homework. So I think the biggest story I remember is we went to the Central Library downtown. And that was in the day when the public museum was part of the library or in the library. And she was trying to find some books with the librarian, and she was busy. And my brother and I were playing on the escalators, and my brother turned off both the giant escalators. And then with the emergency stop buttons. And then the man had to come out with the wrench to turn them back on. And so
I never heard that story.
That's that story. Yeah, and my mom would be telling that the man had to come out with a wrench. So let's go back to our home life. When my father was home, it was not relaxing to be at home. He wasn't particularly happy if he wasn't really intensely working on something. And sometimes often business would follow them home, and they would talk business while she was serving dinner, and he would eat dinner while she was serving dinner. And then when she sat down to eat, he was done eating dinner. And then he would go, maybe he'd bring a painting in, and we'd all have to be quizzed about the painting while we're eating dinner. And then there might be a guest that we had to entertain. And when he was done, he was not a man to do any small talk ever. So when he was done with whatever deal he had to do, because he didn't want to pay to put them up in a hotel, then the poor, I'll just say person, usually a man, a chemist, was left like without being able to converse with my father and my mother. Made them feel comfortable in general. And when he would leave for a month, twice a year, then life was very different. And we had a whole other regiment with my mother, and we laughed a lot as a family. And as I said, we went out to eat a lot. We went to movies. We did lots of fun stuff. And we always look forward to those times when he would go to Europe. And that's sort of the basis of it. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah.
2 lives. Yeah.
Tale of 2 families, I think you said at one point. And Deirdre, for a while, the Baders and the DeVays did live in Milwaukee, not too far from each other. So what are some of your memories of Helen from those years?
Well, I was just a little one. I was pretty little. We moved away when I was 8. I had just turned 8. So it was before then. But yes, for a handful of years, 5, 6 years or so, the 2 sisters were just blocks from each other, raising their young families. Now, of course, since they both had young children in the house and busy lives, they didn't get to just sort of, as we would say today, out together. But we did get to see the 2 families got to see each other in little bunches, little groupings. I do remember the senior Bader house at that point was formidable, because as a little girl, I would go over there and it was like walking into a museum, because every wall was covered with these old brown, old master, heavy oil paintings. I mean, heavy, big, and then heavy subject matter, biblical scenes and so forth. And I was pretty, my eyes would be like this. But, and of course, your you're sternly advised before you go in, don't touch anything, because here are all these priceless oil paintings on the walls. But it was great to be able to have the two sisters. I'm sure that they loved having those years together like that.
Helen also supported your interest in art, didn't she?
She did later on when I did show that interest more as I got older. She would come to visit sometimes when by that point, my parents were living in upstate New York. If she would be coming through, maybe on her way to Europe or just making other travels, she would stop off for a visit. She once brought me, I was in high school, she brought me a little Rembrandt book, which was very sweet that she picked up on the fact that I was interested in art and she wanted to further that. Back to your story, which is one of my favorites that you read, Priscilla, about Joan Prince's encounter with Aunt Helen and getting to know her. I've said this before, but I feel as though Helen was one of those rare people, and I think it is rare, who sees each person they meet, really sees them, takes the time to really see them. Because someone as busy as she would have been, and let's face it, as important as she was by that point, co-founder of a burgeoning company and her husband would be a prominent citizen at that point. And so she had some responsibilities in that way. Those people sometimes don't have time to slow down and have a quiet conversation with a young person or with someone they're just meeting, for that matter. Helen always saw you for who you were, which is, remarkable.
Yeah, I think those were wonderful years for her when her children were young and growing up. I think by the mid 1970s, things became more difficult. For one thing, David, you and your brother were teenagers. But beyond that, your family life was pretty much upended when your father reconnected with Isabel Overton, a woman with whom he had fallen in love 25 years earlier, but who had refused to marry him because she was a devout Protestant and didn't think that she could raise their children in the Jewish faith. And truth be told, even though your parents' marriage, I think in many ways had been happy and fulfilling, Alfred had been carrying a torch for Isabel all those years, which Helen knew about and accepted. But the fact that they were back in touch devastated her. And she decided at that point that she needed to move on. And so it was in 1980, she was in her 50s. She went back to school to pursue a graduate degree in social work. And to the surprise of almost everyone who knew her, she told your father she wanted a divorce. So David, can you talk a little bit about why social work? Was it in fact her true calling? And beyond that, what was the effect on her life of these life-changing events, do you think?
So social work was her true calling, and it's a family thing. We like to work, apparently, so she wanted to continue to work and to help. And as we were growing up, we were always encouraged by both our parents to help other people. So so that was in there. We were driving down the street one day as younger children in the back of the car. My dad was driving, and we drove by the orphanage, which is now where St. Mary's is, and hospital. And I said, what's that? And my dad said, that's an orphanage, and Mom is going to help people like that eventually in life. So, and that was the end of that discussion. On to something else. But that was sort of stuck in my mind as the point where I realized that she really wanted to have an avocation where she helped people. And it became a natural fit after she was done with my parents and done growing the business and wanted to move on, that she was going to get an education in helping people and to work in that field. So what was your other question?
Oh, she went on to thrive, didn't she? Which we can, we'll talk about some more, but
Yes, she totally went on to thrive. Yeah, and it was great to see her do it. It didn't last long enough, but it was fun to see her at the Jewish home and to meet all her residents, which were usually often people I knew growing up, let's say grandparents of friends of mine or something like that. So I was brought in to say hi to a lot of people that, shall we say, moved on through the Milwaukee Jewish home, who I knew, like my violin teacher, he was there, for instance. Jane Klitzner's mother was 106. I visited her, 109, I think, she made it to. I mean, I would visit her with my family until she passed away. So a lot of beautiful stories through the Milwaukee Jewish home.
Right. Deirdre, you have some memories of Helen as a late in life student at UWM, which was, even at that time, was kind of setting itself up to accommodate students who were coming back to school. But so could you talk about that? And again, we're seeing, more indications of her independent spirit here, aren't we? Getting a divorce and going back to school.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a couple of things came to mind, but one, when I was younger, I was still living at home. It was before she went back to school, but she had come from one of her visits, and it was after dinner, she started plunking down, Mom had washed the dishes. We were all getting ready for bed. Helen's plunking down these big books on the dining room table, and I think she was studying German. She did study different languages at different times. And I remember thinking, why in the world, you're a grown lady with this great life, and you already did all your school way back whenever. Why in the world would you voluntarily choose to, do homework? And then after I'd had my own college career, I loved college, and education does run strongly in our family, and love of books, love of learning. But I remember being in my career when I heard about Helen going back to school, and I was floored. I just thought, first of all, I thought it was so courageous, a brave decision.
Yep.
That to come to the realization that is something that you want to do to shape your life going forward. That no, even though you've built a company and raised a family doesn't mean your life is over. That she was going to choose to take a new direction and to start this new step. And I was amazed at her bravery, but once again, I also thought, I can't believe she's choosing to go back to school and get another degree. It was amazing to me.
Right. And she was, again, by far, I assume, the oldest student in her class. But I remember one of her internships was at Milwaukee Legal Aid, and they loved the fact that she was older and she had this real life experience and related so well to some of their clients. So the summer of '81 was particularly memorable for Helen. That's when her divorce became final in June, and she received her degree in August. And I was struck by how well she was able to rise above the pain that Alfred had caused her. And I want to read one last excerpt from the book here. In the end, as Dick DeVay, that would be your dad, Deirdre, her brother-in-law, had predicted, Helen was able to rise above and emerge from the pain Alfred caused her, a feat that did not go unnoticed. Marvin Klitzner, who was a family friend and the family lawyer, credited Helen for the classy way she handled the divorce. She knew and understood that we continued to be friends with her ex-husband. Nevertheless, she found it in her heart to continue to be close, intimate friends with us, he said. I don't think she had an ounce of resentment in her system. His daughter, Francie Wolf, noted that although divorce was not unheard of or necessarily frowned upon in the Jewish faith, it was somewhat unusual for a couple to divorce after decades of marriage. I would say I was proud of her, said Wolf, for facing a man and saying, I want out. Mm-hmm. Rabbi Peter Mailer, rabbi of the synagogue in Sheboygan, Helen joined in the early 80s, noted that unlike the ill will and bitterness that often characterized life after divorce, Helen wanted to live her life free of anger and animosity and wanted her sons to be engaged by a sense of warmth and love, which I just think is remarkable. And then following graduation, that was the summer, David, as you mentioned, she goes on to take a position at the Milwaukee Jewish Home, where she works with patients suffering from dementia, and she begins to educate herself and the staff about Alzheimer's disease, which is just being recognized as the leading cause of dementia in older adults. She goes on to have a short but very successful career as a social worker there. She was ahead of her time in terms of helping the home develop policies to best deal with Alzheimer's patients. And then the last years of her life were also dedicated to private, often anonymous philanthropy, which upon her death from cancer in 1989 was formalized in the Helen Bader Foundation, which went on for 24 years, funding roughly $250 million in projects, and which was reorganized in 2015 as Vader Philanthropies. Particularly significant was a $5 million grant from the foundation in 2001 to UWM, to the School of Social Welfare there, which was then renamed in Helen's name. I was touched by the fact that shortly after Helen's death, I think it was in 91, when the foundation was, when news of the foundation was published, Helen had been so unassuming during her life that even people who knew her well, friends of hers who knew her well, were shocked to learn that she was in fact a wealthy woman. So David, you talked a little bit about your mom's legacy as a social worker. What else do you hope that readers will take away from her story?
Well, I think that it's important to, and one of her best traits was that I try to use is judge people for who they are and not who for you want them to be. So look at the whole person, look at the issues that make them who they are, and and look for the essence of people. So I think that those are some of the issues I wanted to tell the viewers today. So when somebody totally freaks you out, and just take a moment and look at them and see if these people are, give them a little space, to let them be the best they can be. Mm-hmm. in your head. So people felt like that they could be the best they could be by being the best kind of from within themselves, not trying to please other people. And she encouraged you to grow like that. So it was beautiful. Yes, beautiful story.
I love that her legacy is imbued with those personal traits. Of course, we all, so many of us drive by the UWM campus and the School of Social Welfare. And I guess this would be the time to add that that Bader is publishing in the coming weeks, I believe it's coming out, a companion volume to An Independent Spirit. It's a history of the UWM, the Helen Bader School of Social Welfare at UWM, that I co-authored with Carolyn Boussier. And so on the one hand, you have these big kind of institutional parts of her legacy, the School of Social Welfare, the concert hall at the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music, the recital hall at the Delazzo Center at UWM. But on the other hand, you also have these very personal attributes and kinds of impacts that she had on people and what they took away with them, such as we heard from Joan Price. Deirdre, weigh in. How do you see her legacy? How do you remember Helen?
Well, the more I think about Aunt Helen, the more remarkable it is, especially for a woman of her time. We might not think it's quite so unusual now. There are more freedoms in society now, but she really, throughout her life, grew. She grew as a person. She grew in her pursuits, in her knowledge, in her experience, in her ability to give to others. And yet she managed to do that, go through all those different stages in her life, all profoundly different from each other, and remain true to the little girl that she was when she grew up, the little girl from the prairie with the overalls on, who was nothing if not honest, was going to tell her dad that mother was baking a cake at home. She was not going to keep a secret. She was going to tell the truth about what was happening. But she really did show tremendous courage, like I said, in terms of, we've talked about, but to grow up as a Christian and choose to convert and become a Jewish woman, wife, raise her boys that way in the faith, be devout, and start a company from nothing in Milwaukee, grow that company to be a significant business, and to then start a whole new life. It's tremendous. It really is. It really is remarkable, and to do it as a person who always remained also kind and, as my dad liked to point out, modest, because he always said those two Daniels girls, he didn't understand it himself, but they had absolutely no ego, is how he always put it. They didn't think about themselves. They thought about what they could and should do for others. And I think that's part of their gift.
Well, researching and writing this book was a gift to me. My only regret is that I never knew Helen. But it was a wonderful experience for me. And to get to know the two of you as well, and Dan as well, and the people at Vader. So I guess we'll wrap it up there. And I think we're inviting Christina back in. Again, thanks to you, Christina, and the Milwaukee Public Library. This was wonderful. We always love to have an opportunity to talk about the remarkable Helen Daniels Bader. So we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to invite anyone from the audience to submit a question. I've kind of been keeping an eye and I haven't seen one yet, but I do want to read a comment from the chat because I just felt it was really lovely, and I kept thinking about it as I heard all of you speak. They said Helen, embodied the most fundamental social welfare principles. So I thought that was really sweet. And I don't see any questions yet. So, but I just want to thank you all again. We did include those links to the 3 ways you can obtain a copy of the book in the chat once again. So you can buy directly from Amazon, get a copy from Milwaukee Public Library, or request a free copy. So please make sure you do that and look for that second volume that Priscilla mentioned.
You can learn more about this young woman right here.
Oh. I love the photos in the book and the design of the book by our book designer, Kate Hawley. It really looks beautiful. And
It's a beautiful book. Yeah.
Well, I don't see any other questions. So with that, I'm just going to thank you three once again for sharing all of this with the library and bringing this story to life for us. And thank the audience for attending. And we will have a recording of this shared with everyone. You'll get a direct link via email, and then we'll have it on Milwaukee Public Library's YouTube page. So YouTube channel. So feel free to share that with everyone and stay connected with Milwaukee Public Library. You can visit our website, mpl.org, to find out more about all of our programs and services. So thank you again, Priscilla, David, and Deirdre. Thank you so much. And everyone have a good rest of your Monday.
Thank you very much.
thanks, Christina.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good to see everyone.
Bye, everyone.